Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry joins us, former NATO commander. Great to have you with us on the programme this evening, Chris. Is he right? Is he right that the invasion of Ukraine is just the start for Putin?
Well, Ben, Putin's an opportunist, so we can't really judge what he's going to do next in terms of how today is framed. What we can see is that he's already putting a lot of military and what we call grey zone warfare pressure on the Baltic states and also Denmark, Finland, Sweden, the Nordic states, mainly because Sweden and Finland dared to join NATO recently, but also the Russians have always had a real vulnerability feeling about the Baltic. You go back to the 1950s, they were always talking about the threats that come through not only the Baltic, but also the Black Sea. Now, they've neutralized the Black Sea, they think, by what they've done in Ukraine. And I think we're going to see increasing pressure on, as I said, the Nordic and the Baltic states. It's interesting that he's using those components of military capability that he doesn't need in Ukraine right now. The other thing I think is worth considering is he's going to have nearly 800,000 people under arms if he comes to terms in Ukraine. He's going to need to employ them. He can't take them back to Russia. After they got out of Afghanistan, there are all sorts of problems with returning soldiers. And so I think you might have the same problem. So he'll look to employ them. So I think two things I think he'll do. One is to put them in the Western Military District, really to put pressure on our allies around the Baltic and in the Nordic region. And we'll see an increase in these overflights and other things. He'll also, I think, probably put them into Africa to reinforce the Wagner Group, which you'll remember, is pretty strong there in terms of seizing and controlling assets in various countries.
The shift in tone from Donald Trump that we've seen this week, Chris, at the United Nations General Assembly, the suggestion, first time I think I've heard Trump say this, that Ukraine can take back control of all the land that's been lost to Russia, the kind of toughening up of language against Putin. How significant do you think this kind of change in Trump's rhetoric is?
And I think we have to read between the lines here. I've read his words very carefully on this. What he's actually saying is, I'm losing interest in this. It's up to you Europeans to support Zelenskyy, and if you support him, you can get that land back. I'm not that confident, to tell you the truth. He said he'll provide as many arms and material that NATO needs. That's what he said. But I've got no doubt that he's looking for Europe to take the load here. The United States ain't going to get involved.
Let me just ask you about the sort of the potential Russian interference that we've seen. We saw the drones in Poland. There were reports of Romanian airspace having been violated. Another airport in Denmark has been forced to close after drones were spotted nearby. What is Russia playing at the moment, Chris? And do you think that NATO's response to those provocations has so far been too weak?
Oh, yeah, two good questions there, Ben. First of all, Putin and the people around him doesn't like the fact that we're supporting Ukraine. This should have been all over by now as far as Russia's concerned. And it's his way of saying, look, I'm going to really start telling you I'm not impressed with what you're doing, and therefore I'm going to put pressure on you in the meantime. He's also probing to see what he can do afterwards. If he finds us to be weak and he probes. I mean, there's a very famous Leninist saying. He said, you probe with bayonets. If you find mush, you continue. If you find steel, then you withdraw. And your second question, Ben, we need to be much more robust. I think the Polish Prime Minister Sikorski said it. He said, look, the next time a drone or an aircraft comes across, we're going to shoot it down and it'll be your fault. Now, if it was the other way around, Ben, and we had our aircraft straying into Russian airspace, they'd be permanently grounded by now.
You think we should be shooting more of these drones and these planes down?
I think the drones have got to come down because there's no risk to that, to tell you the truth, except for the debris. But I think the Russians have got to know in any terms, if they keep violating NATO airspace, they're going to come down. In 2009, Ben, the Turks detected a Russian warplane for 20 seconds inside their airspace, and they shot it down. And guess what? There haven't been any other violations over Turkish airspace since. So I'm afraid when you're dealing with dictators, I've got a doctorate in psychology. It's about how you deal with dictators. You actually have to go back hard and say, I need to give you a very simple message here. If you start trying to be... the key problem, Ben, is everybody interprets the Russians as to how we would think. They never think how the Russians would think. I had I was listening to a speech by a Russian general to their staff course about 6 months ago, and a student asked this general, how are we going to win in Ukraine? And he said, it's very simple. We're going to throw corpses at it. And, there's nothing, there's no way a British or a NATO general could say that, even if he thought it.
Absolutely. Really interesting. Thanks for coming on. Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, former NATO commander.